Close your eyes for a moment and imagine this. You're standing in a vast plain. Grass is swaying in the wind, the horizon stretching endlessly. The air smells of damp earth and smoke from a fire that barely survived the night. The only sounds are the cry of distant birds and your own heartbeat. You're alone. For many early humans, this wasn't imagination, it was reality. Before tribes, before villages, before the web of society, our ancestors lived in small bands, scattered and fragile. Some were alone for long stretches, searching for food, water, and shelter, moving constantly across dangerous terrain. To survive, you needed cunning, strength, and a little luck. We often picture these first humans as brute hunters, armed with crude stone tools, wandering through forests and plains in endless pursuit of prey. But survival wasn't just about killing a mammoth or chasing down a deer. It was about knowing when to hide, when to move, when to conserve your strength. Think about it. What's harder, chasing a beast bigger than a car, or outlasting the hunger that gnaws at you when food runs out? Survival wasn't glorious. It was exhausting. And here's the twist. Being a lonely hunter didn't always mean being physically alone. Even in small groups, survival was precarious. A broken bone could mean death. A cold night without fire could claim lives. There were no doctors, no backup plans, no second chances. Yet in this loneliness, something powerful was brewing. Every moment of struggle taught our ancestors something. That survival couldn't remain a solitary game forever. Slowly, instinct whispered a new idea: connection. It wasn't obvious at first, but hunger and danger began shaping behavior. Those who cooperated, even in the smallest ways, had better odds. Sharing a piece of meat, protecting each other's sleep, watching for predators. It wasn't kindness for kindness' sake. It was survival. But before cooperation became normal, the lonely hunter was the baseline. Imagine nights filled with silence, days chasing tracks that led nowhere, and a constant reminder that nature didn't care if he lived or died. Loneliness was not just emotional, it was deadly. This fragile beginning set the stage for something remarkable. Out of isolation would come togetherness. Out of loneliness would come society. But before we reach tribes in trust, we must first sit with the hunt alone, cold, determined, and on the edge of extinction. The question is, how did he or she find the first spark that would lead us out of loneliness? If the lonely hunter was the first act of humanity's story, fire was a turning point. Fire was more than warmth, it was magic. Imagine the first time our ancestors saw it. Lightning splitting a tree, flames roaring, the ground glowing red. Terrifying, yes, but also mesmerizing. What happens when night falls in a world without fire? Darkness is absolute. Predators own the night. The cold gnaws at your bones. Every shadow feels like a threat. But with fire, the night transformed. Suddenly, humans could gather in one place without fear of immediate attack. Fire pushed back the darkness, kept wolves at bay, cooked food, and gave warmth. But fire did something even more profound. Gave space for stories. Think about sitting around a campfire today. The way flames hypnotize you. The way conversations feel different, deeper. For our ancestors, this was the first classroom, the first theater, the first place where knowledge passed from one person to another. By the flicker of firelight, hunters explained how to track game. Elders shared warnings of dangerous rivers or poisonous plants. And yes, this is where myths began. The sky, the stars, the thunder, everything mysterious found its way into whispered stories. But why does this matter socially? Because fire required care. Someone had to tend it, feed it, protect it. Fire created responsibility, and shared responsibility created bonds. And so, firelight gatherings weren't just about survival. They were the birthplace of culture. They transformed humans from scattered individuals into people who could sit, listen, imagine, and dream together. Every ember that glowed in those early nights was more than it was the first spark of community. Before tribes, before even the idea of society, came something more intimate. Family. Why did family matter? Because raising a human child was unlike raising any other. A baby horse can run within hours. A baby gazelle is grazing within days. But a human infant, helpless for years. Without cooperation, survival was nearly impossible. So early humans began leaning into kinship. Mothers, fathers, siblings weren't as clearly defined as ours today. But the instinct to protect the young bound people together. Picture a mother cradling her child beside a fire. Picture a father bringing back meat from a hunt. Picture siblings sharing scraps of berries or keeping watch through the night. These weren't just acts of love, they were acts of survival strategy. And slowly, these bonds created something extraordinary. Loyalty. Not loyalty to an abstract idea, but loyalty to blood, to kin, to those whose survival meant your survival. The first families became the glue that held groups together. And within those bonds, humans discovered one of the most powerful forces in history. Trust. Trust became the foundation of something greater. The ability to imagine a world where us mattered more than me. Families grew, families merged, and suddenly, small bands weren't enough. Larger groups began forming what we might call tribes. But bigger groups meant bigger challenges. Feeding 30 people is harder than feeding 5. Protecting a whole group required organization. And yet, larger groups also brought benefits. Safety in numbers, better hunting strategies, and a deeper pool of knowledge. So how did humans manage this? By learning cooperation on a new scale. Hunters coordinated their moves. Gatherers divided tasks. Elders advised. The young learned, of course. Tension was inevitable. Disagreements arose. Resources ran short. Rivalries sparked. But in struggling to solve these conflicts, humans were writing the first rough draft of society. Tribes weren't perfect, but they were resilient. Together, they could do what the lonely hunter never could: adapt, expand, and endure. This was humanity's first experiment in scaling up connection, and it worked. What made larger tribes possible? One word: language. At first, communication was gestures, grunts, and signals. But slowly, sounds gained meaning. A warning call, a hunting signal, a word for fire. And once meanings stabilized, the human mind unlocked something revolutionary: shared imagination. Language allowed humans to coordinate hunts, to describe dangers, to plan for the future. But it also allowed something deeper: storytelling. With words, humans could pass down knowledge across generations. They could share dreams, ideas, myths, and lessons. Language became the bridge that connected minds across time. And here's the astonishing part: once we could talk, we could imagine together. Entire communities could share a vision, a plan, a hope. That is the true power of words. They built tribes not with stone, but with meaning. With language came imagination. And with imagination came belief. Step into a cave in France or Spain, and you'll see handprints, animals, symbols. These weren't random doodles. They were humanity's first attempts at recording meaning, at leaving behind more than footprints. Why did early humans paint caves? Why bury their dead with tools or ornaments? These weren't acts of survival. They were acts of meaning-making. Through symbols and rituals, humans created myths. Myths weren't lies, they were frameworks for understanding a dangerous, mysterious world. They united people under shared stories. Whether it was the spirit of an animal, the power of the sun, or the mystery of death, these beliefs gave humans a sense of connection to something greater than themselves. Symbols were society's first glue. They turned tribes into cultures. But unity has a price. As groups grew, so did competition. Resources weren't infinite. Rivers dried. Herds moved. Territories overlapped. And when survival was on the line, conflict was inevitable. The first conflicts weren't wars as we know them, no armies, no nations, but they were battles of survival. Clashes between groups over water, land, or hunting grounds. And yet, conflict shaped humanity. It forced tribes to strengthen their bonds, to defend each other, to innovate in strategy. Violence was tragic, but it was also transformative. In conflict, humans learned not only to fight, but to negotiate, to form alliances, to trade peace for survival. Conflict didn't just divide us, it taught us how to come back together. Picture this: two tribes approach the same river from opposite banks. For a moment, the air is heavy. Hands clutch spears, eyes narrow, every muscle tight with suspicion. In a world where survival was a daily battle, meeting strangers often meant danger. And yet something remarkable began to happen. Instead of clashing, some groups chose another path. They lowered their weapons, raised their hands, and offered something: a piece of dried meat, a stone blade, a handful of berries, a gesture, an invitation. This was the dawn of trade. Trade might seem like an everyday thing now. We swipe a card, exchange money, grab what we need. But back then, it was nothing short of revolutionary. It wasn't about currency. It was about survival. One tribe might have gathered an abundance of nuts and berries, while another had meat from a successful hunt. Instead of fighting over what each lacked, they discovered a simple truth. Both could benefit by sharing. But make no mistake, trade wasn't just about goods. It was about trust. To hand something over and expect something in return required faith that the other side wouldn't just take and run. It was a fragile experiment in cooperation between strangers. And this experiment reshaped humanity. Think about the impact. When tribes began trading, they weren't just filling stomachs, they were forming connections. They were building bridges where before there had only been suspicion. Each successful exchange planted a seed of trust. The next meeting became less tense. The next gift more generous. Slowly, trade became a ritual, a rhythm, a way of turning them into us. And out of this fragile system, alliances were born. A tribe that traded well might call upon another for help in times of scarcity. Bonds extended beyond bloodlines. For the first time, humanity was experimenting with relationships that stretched farther than family or immediate tribe. Trade also fueled innovation. Imagine a group living near a river, rich in flint, perfect for tool-making. Another tribe, far from such resources, might desperately need better blades. When the two met, knowledge and goods flowed together. The exchange of materials led to an exchange of ideas. New tools, new techniques, and new ways of living, spread not by conquest, but by cooperation. And there's something even deeper here. Trade didn't just bring survival, it brought possibility. With trade, groups could begin to specialize. Some became master toolmakers. Others excelled at hunting or gathering rare plants. Suddenly, the burden of survival wasn't only on individual shoulders, it was shared through networks of exchange. If you think about it, this is the beginning of economy itself. Not in the sense of coins and markets, but in the sense of trust, relationships, and value. It was humanity's first step toward realizing that survival wasn't just about taking. Sometimes, it was about giving. So, when we look at those ancient rivers and forgotten paths where tribes once met, we shouldn't just see survival, we should see the spark of something bigger. The first flicker of human cooperation, on a grander scale. Trade wasn't just survival. It was the first bridge towards civilization. Imagine a group of 30 people, huddled together in the wilderness. They've survived the hunt, shared food, and sung around the fire. But now, a question arises. A rival group has been seen near Beidou. They move camp, or do they stay? Who decides? For early tribes, leadership wasn't a luxury. It was survival. But unlike today's governments, leadership back then wasn't about crowns or thrones. It was about trust, respect, and the ability to guide others in the moment. Sometimes it was the hunter who could track an animal across days of shifting winds. Sometimes it was the elder who remembered where the rivers flowed during dry seasons. Sometimes it was a healer who understood plants and their strange powers. Leadership in early tribes was fluid. It wasn't fixed in stone. You didn't inherit power, you earned it. And if you lost the group's trust, you could be even abandoned. This balance between leaders and followers was fragile. Too much control, and resentment grew. Too little, and chaos reigned. Think about it. A tribe couldn't function if everyone was shouting orders at once. But it also couldn't survive if one person ruled with fear, hoarding food or favor. So what kept the balance? Stories. Around the fire, people told tales of great hunters who shared their kill, of wise elders who guided the lost, of those who betrayed the tribe and met dark ends. These stories weren't just entertainment, they were lessons in leadership, reminders of what kind of behavior was honored and what was despised. But leadership wasn't only about power, it was about responsibility. If you led a hunt that failed, the group went hungry. If you chose to move camp and storms struck, everyone suffered. A leader bore the weight of survival, and followers. They weren't passive. They questioned, they tested, they whispered doubts. In fact, some anthropologists suggest that early human groups were more democratic than many societies today. Decisions were often debated, argued, and settled by consensus. Leaders could rise quickly, but they could fall just as fast. Yet, beneath all this lay something deeply human, the need for direction. In the face of danger, uncertainty, and fear, humans looked for someone to follow, someone to trust, someone who could give meaning to their struggle. From these fragile beginnings came the first sparks of hierarchy. And with hierarchy came both strength and danger. Strength, because order allowed tribes to survive. Danger, because power, once tasted, could grow. Leadership was never simple. But it was inevitable. Because where there are people, there are choices. And where there are choices, someone must guide the way. By the time tribes had leaders, language, stories, and trade, humanity stood on the edge of something bigger. Picture the world thousands of years ago. Camps that once moved endlessly now began to linger. Why? Because someone noticed that seeds left in the soil grew into plants. Someone realized that animals could be tamed instead of hunted. Slowly, the rhythm of human life shifted from chasing the world to shaping it. This was the beginning of settlement. Villages sprouted near rivers, fertile plains, and sheltered valleys. No longer did fire pits fade into ashes and vanish with the wind. Now, permanent hearths burned. No longer did caves echo with temporary songs. Now, walls rose, huts stood, and paths were carved into the earth. And with permanence came transformation. Families grew into clans, clans into villages, villages into cultures. The scale of human cooperation expanded beyond anything the lonely hunter could have imagined. Now, there were roles: farmers, potters, builders, storytellers. Specialization was born. But something else grew with it: inequality. As villages settled, resources could be hoarded, food could be stored, status could be claimed. The first sparks of wealth, and with it, division appeared. Leaders became chiefs, stories became laws. What was once a fragile, flexible balance of power began to harden into systems. And yet, none of this would have been possible without the long path behind us. The lonely hunter who learned to share, the families who built trust, the tribes who forged unity, the storytellers who gave voice to dreams. Each stage was a stepping stone, carrying humanity from wilderness to civilization. Look at our cities today: skyscrapers piercing the sky, streets buzzing with life, satellites circling above. It all feels impossibly advanced compared to a cave fire. And yet, deep down, the essence hasn't changed. We still gather, we still follow leaders, we still trade, we still tell stories to make sense of the world. Civilization wasn't a sudden leap, it was a slow burn, fueled by survival, trust, and imagination. From hunters to tribes, from tribes to villages, from villages to civilizations. Humanity's story is not just about tools or technology, it's about connection. The truth is simple yet profound. We were never meant to survive alone. Our greatest invention wasn't fire, or language, or even farming. It was each other. And that invention continues today. Every handshake, every shared meal, every story told is an echo of the moment when our ancestors stepped out of the cave and into the world we built together.